All right, hello everybody. I'm Yasmin Winkler. I'm with United Healthcare and I'm from the class of 2013. Thank you so much for coming and for participating already just with our first session that Greg led. So I'm going to tell you a little story. So in 2009, our CEO of United Health Group commissioned the establishment of an innovation council. And some of you know this story because you've heard me tell it before. And that was really in an attempt to kind of get our groove back. So we had felt that as United Health Group, we had always been a very innovative organization, or as innovative as a carrier can be, and that we had kind of lost some of that juice. And so this was an attempt to really, across our entire enterprise, which now is about 145,000 people, really do some of the things that actually Greg was describing earlier. So how did we really establish a culture of innovation? How did we actually develop an innovation competency? Because just because you say you're going to be innovative doesn't mean that voila just kind of happens. How were we going to, from an external perspective, really establish ourselves as a market leader with regards to innovation? And what would it take for us to be able to do that? So in 2010, after having kicked off the Innovation Council, which Gail Boudreau, many of you know and have been exposed to her, she co-leads with our CFO, Dave Wickman. I lead that Innovation Council team that actually helps to support all of that activity. And so we needed to hire people that were really different than anything that we had ever seen or been within United Health Group, right? And so in our quest, we found Ryan Armbruster, who you're going to be hearing from through lunch today. And what Ryan brings to us, because you guys can all read his bio, but from a reality, making it real kind of perspective, is that he is a human-centered design expert. So this is about designing for people, all different kinds of people, when you're actually architecting solutions. So when you're thinking about new products or tools or services or capabilities, how do you really think about this from a people perspective, not from an insurance carrier or even from a provider perspective or from a finance perspective or any of those other things that we would typically look at, but how do you design it really differently and really think about how that's going to impact the lives of the people that we serve. And so with a power of really one, because Ryan doesn't really have a whole lot of people that report to him, he has been able to transform the language of our organization so that he even has our CEO, Steve Hemsley, talking about human-centered design. And we think about that now in everything that we do all the time. So my product designers, for example, are thinking about how it is that they're going to develop a new solution or product from a very different perspective that's much more outside in than it used to be, because we usually design things inside out, right? And so Ryan has had an incredible impact on our organization, far and wide. That's hard to do when you have 145,000 employees in several businesses, and is asked to participate in a whole lot of solutioning all throughout our organization. And many of you who have actually come to the learning excursion that we have hosted at United Healthcare have been exposed to Ryan before. So let's welcome Ryan, because he's here by popular demand, because this was one of the things that people really wanted for this agenda. And so I hope that you all will really benefit from the discussion we're going to have with him. Ryan Armbruster, where are you? Oh, there you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for the compliments of being invited to spend some time with you. It's really my honor to be here with you guys and to have the opportunity to see some familiar faces again. You guys make it sound like I have a really hard job, don't I? It did sound like that, didn't it? It's not a good thing that I really enjoy it. You know, it is a challenge, and that's what I enjoy, is looking for the challenges, particularly when it comes to large organizations. I have a hard job here today as well, I think, because I think it's true that many of you folks have been to United Health Group and have heard me speak there, and some haven't, though, right? So how many folks in the room have been to United? And wow, okay, all right. and a few haven't. So I have to blend my talk today a little bit between not telling you guys all the things that you've already heard from me or maybe have forgotten, some of it will be new, but also taking it to the next level. So in many ways I'll rely on you guys as well to help push me a little further so that we can get to an even richer conversation. It's my first time to Hanover, New Hampshire. Interestingly enough, Yaz did not tell me where Hanover was before I committed to coming here. Yeah, right? I'm like, Yaz, where are we going? Where is it? How do you get there? Just, I'll see you there. I'll see you there. So I made it though, and it's lovely here. So thanks again for the opportunity to be with you. Just a bit about my background. Yaz mentioned I've spent a long time thinking about design, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to be able to spend the better part of a decade now working full-time thinking about innovation and human-centered design within large companies. And the start of that was at Mayo Clinic. So I was happy to hear some references to Mayo Clinic here this morning. And about, more than 10 years ago now, I was working in the Department of Medicine at Mayo Clinic and working with a great physician there named Nick LaRusso, who some of you may know today. But he had a vision for what he was doing as the chair of the Department of Medicine. And his vision was to have a way to deal with some really angry physicians in his department. Because he had the Department of Medicine at Mayo Clinic was at the time about 650 physicians. And at that time, the real full implementation of the electronic medical record was hitting the practice, right? And you can imagine, and many of you can probably relate to how that felt going through that process, right? And so Nick, as the chair of the Department of Medicine, was the cat, he was like the lightning rod, for every frustration that this department had about the electronic medical record and what needed to be done differently. So Nick, as a clinical scientist, had this idea of, I have a GI lab across the street where I test and I run experiments and I figure out scientifically what works and what doesn't. But when I have a bunch of physicians come to me and argue about what they think is the right way and the wrong way to design our care delivery processes, I don't have evidence. I don't have evidence to say that one way is really better than the other. And certainly one way probably is better than the other, but he doesn't have the evidence to prove it. So he brought this idea to me and he said, Ryan, why can't you help me figure out how to set up a lab where we can gather that evidence so I don't have to be the lightning rod so I can address their frustrations or, maybe help guide the development of our technology systems. I said, that's a pretty cool idea. So I set off in doing that a little bit, but what I didn't want to do was just get in the business of proving whether something that was existing was kind of right or wrong, which was kind of his idea. I also knew that you couldn't really scientifically create everything that you needed to create a new delivery system, right? And so how do you actually get into the business of creating and forming things from the start the right way, rather than waiting until something gets out there and then trying to prove whether it's right or wrong? So that's where we challenged the model to push it back a little further and to say, well, if we're going to get in the business of really designing and creating things the right way, what would it take? And that's when we started to learn about innovation and design and started to build that into what became the Spark Design Lab at Mayo Clinic. And the Spark Design Lab, it had a bunch of unique assets, one of which was a physical laboratory. So he had a lab across the street, which was kind of the model. And so he said, well, let's build a laboratory in the clinical practice. And so the Spark Design Lab it was in the outpatient practice, and it was literally right in the middle of the practice, so that there's exam rooms and doctors seeing patients right across the hall from where we had the other unique asset of the Spark Design Lab, which was a group of professional designers who were there watching what was happening every day in that clinical practice, trying new things, experimenting, learning, and so on and so forth. And so that unique model quickly became a very, very high demand asset at Mayo Clinic because of the types of information it was producing for the practice was information that the practice didn't have before. Within 6 or 8 months of doing that type of work, we were almost asked exclusively to do work for the Board of Governors at Mayo Clinic, working on projects like how do we protect and catalyze and propel the integrated care delivery model at Mayo Clinic. Huge strategic questions about the design of the Mayo Clinic practice. And then that, the story after that was that it catalyzed and now is set up as the Center for Innovation at Mayo Clinic, one of the probably the largest and probably most well-established centers for innovation within any large healthcare institution here in the United States. Since then, because I'm such a glutton for punishment and I love to build new things, I have left and since, as Yas mentioned, joined United Health Group, where I'm trying to go after similar endeavors. Is how can we build the capabilities within large organizations to design better healthcare services? So today's session is a journey from some high-level things about what design is and what innovation is, all the way down into we're going to get our hands a little dirty and actually experience some of the parts of the design process and then pull it back out. And the reason why I want to do both, and it's really hard to do both in one session, is because we have to talk about what design is and why it matters. Because although I have a sense that you guys have a pretty good understanding of that, I'm still somewhat shocked to hear from so many organizations that they don't have professional designers working within their organizations. I don't see evidence of this work within a lot of the healthcare delivery organizations that I visit and spend time with. So as much as I talk with leaders about it and it seems to make sense, for some reason it isn't coming to life in a lot of organizations. And I want to share that with you as well and get your perspectives on, why is that and what can we do to make that different. So we're going to start at the high level about design, why it matters, why it's important, how it can provide value within healthcare organizations. And then I'll dive a little deep and we'll get into the design process a little bit, not because I think that any of you are going to spend your time actually doing the design work itself, but because it helps you get an understanding of what it is, how it works, what professionals do when they go through the process, and why it's probably very different than anything that you're doing today within your organization. And then last, we'll wrap it up with, okay, now I get why it matters, why it's important. What are the organizational considerations for how can I build this, or what should I be thinking about how to build this into my practice? Where does it matter? How is it going to provide value? How am I going to get the value out of it? Make sense? Let's continue. So why design? There's some great studies coming out lately. Now, this is across all industries that profile how design can provide value to organizations. And this is a recent one here. I think this was published, well, it was in the Design Management Review here in February of this year, showing that, and they did an index of design-centric companies versus non-design-centric companies. So those types of companies that have design built into their DNA, and design drives a lot of their actions in terms of innovation and what they bring to market. You can see that the overall return in terms of the yielded, the returns on the investment over that period of time are much, much larger for those companies that leverage design to deliver tangible business results. So at a meta level, outside of the healthcare industry, it's true that design-driven companies are generating a lot more value than other companies in the space. So let's link that back, that conversation, let's link that to an overarching theme around innovation here, because design is really a driver of innovation. I'm going to break down innovation into 3 themes, and this is actually a categorization that was put together by Booz, I think over the past couple of years. And they characterize innovation around 3 different topics. One is market-based innovation. Market-based innovation are things that you do differently in your organization in response to changes in market dynamics. This, in the healthcare industry, is mostly driven by government. So the government can really change the industry and the market overnight, and we spend a lot of time in our organizations making changes to respond to mostly government-driven market changes, but also other changes in the market driven by other organizations. You have technology-based innovation. This one's pretty straightforward. This is mostly when a new technology either is invented or a technology begins to drop its price point to a level where we can start to apply it for a broader range of purposes. All of a sudden I can use this technology to do this, or to do this and to this, and repurpose it and use it for new value propositions. And then lastly, there's this category around needs-based innovation. And needs-based innovation is what are the unmet human needs mostly, customers and employees, and how can I design new products or new services to meet those needs? Okay? So 3 different types of innovation. I'd like to right now spend just like a quick 3-4 minutes at your tables. And what I'd love you to just really talk about really quickly is if you had to think about these three types of innovation, you as an organization, think about in the context of your organization, you're innovating, you're changing things, and you're putting new things in place that are going to deliver new value for your organization, right? And if I told you that all types of innovation can pretty much be categorized into these three buckets, I'd like you to discuss where do you think organizationally you spend the most of your organizational resources and assets innovating? Is it market-based, is it technology-based, or is it needs-based? Make sense? Okay, just a quick 3 minutes discussing at your table, and then we'll regroup. 3 minutes goes really quick, by the way.
Oh, I hope so.
Filter that.
One or two. And they're turned on.
They are. So I can multitask.
Okay, that was the quick 3 minutes. Let me get a show of hands. So a show of hands, how many folks spend most of their organizational assets and time on market-based innovation? Show of hands. Balanced for market-based innovation. You feel like your organization probably spends most of its resources market-based innovation. Okay, technology-based innovation? Yep, and needs-based innovation. Yay, you guys are very honest with yourselves. I was really curious on how that was going to turn out, but it's so true. And let me give you a couple of diagrams to show this in the healthcare industry particularly. You guys familiar with this diagram? You've seen this one before. I love this diagram, one of my favorites. This is our healthcare system. Welcome. This, if this doesn't scream to you market-based innovation, I can't put up another diagram that's going to scream market-based innovation any more than this right here, right? This is our healthcare system, right? And I have to read to make sure. So this is prepared by the Joint Economic Committee, I think a couple of years ago, right? As part of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. So if you want copies later, I'm happy to, this is great bedtime reading. Okay, market-based innovation. Here's, and those of you who visit United Health Group have seen me talk about this before, but I can't believe that this doesn't get more attention because every time I see this, my blood pressure goes up just a little bit related to this chart, okay? So this is overall U.S. labor productivity employment growth. And let me tell you what's going on in the slide here. Is you have real sector growth here over on the left across industries, right? And real sector growth is made up of two components, labor productivity growth and employment growth. Over the past 20 years or so, from 1990 to 2010, pretty much every industry grew, right? Except for manufacturing. We don't know the reasons why manufacturing took a dip over the last 20 years. The thing that we probably didn't know that's very, very surprising is this labor productivity growth, right? So for the amount of labor that was added, are you more productive in the use of that labor? And there's only one industry over the last 20 years that has become less productive. Less productive people. Do we all understand what that means? Less productive. That means that you working in the healthcare industry today do less than what you could have done 20 years ago. Think about that. Do you remember what the world looked like 20 years ago? Well, it looks really the same today because we're still using fax machines and it doesn't look that much different. But think about it, we didn't have the internet. The internet wasn't even around. I mean, a lot of the technology that we use today wasn't around. And it's so shocking to me that so many things are available to us now to be more efficient, but yet the overall industry has become less efficient. And to me, as a leader in healthcare, that just really gets me fired up, right? It's like, it's unacceptable, really, as someone, as a leader in the industry. It's like, how can we be comfortable with that? And it's something that I get really excited about and want to change. Now, in the article, you can see it was in the New England Journal of Medicine a few years ago. In the article, they go on to hypothesize about why this is, basically trying to provide a bunch of cop-outs, excuses for like, well, we're less productive because we have to deal with people, and people are unpredictable, and it's highly, people-intensive industry, and all this. They were all really loose justifications, really loose, they weren't even justifications, trying to explain why that happened. So it still remains to be the case. And the reason why I think this is happening, this, right, is because we spend almost all of our resources in healthcare doing market-based and technology-based innovation. And when you do that, you can sometimes go astray, right, of what's truly providing value, because all of a sudden in like this system, we're just building value propositions on top of other value propositions for other value propositions, and pretty soon, we're serving other entities within the system that have very, very unclear line of path in terms of the actual output, right, the actual output of that. So a lot of the needs-based innovation would actually challenge the necessity of a lot of things in this diagram so that we can, deliver more value propositions directly around needs-based innovation. So the lack of needs-based innovation, I think, in some ways has contributed to the situation in which we find ourselves today. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for trying to drive us back towards what is needs-based innovation. Because everything I see is an indicator that we need more of it. The healthcare system needs more attention to needs-based innovation. That's the platform, excuse me, by which we start talking about design. Design is our process, is our catalyst, is our methods, is our reliable kind of way of doing needs-based innovation. So if you're with me so far and you agree, okay, needs-based innovation, we definitely need to do it more. How do we do it? What does it look like? That's why we do design. Design is needs-based innovation. Fundamentally, design, we have to understand it's made up of two things, okay? So kind of forget everything you have in your mind right now about what design is, and think about it from this perspective. One, all design is about creating things. It's about bringing things to life. So in that way, it's really connected with innovation. Innovation is about doing new things that are creating value, right? So it's about creating. All the fields of design, the 125 recognized fields of design in the professional discipline, are all about creating something. That's pretty easy to understand. The part about design that most of us don't have an appreciation for or don't understand is that in order to design something really effectively, there's a piece up front where we need to deeply understand the people that we're designing something for. Okay? This is where the correlation is between needs-based innovation, is that, well, I have to understand the needs of the people I need to create something for in order to create it. So every field of design should use this process. Now, there's a difference between really good designers and really poor designers, right? And most of the difference is usually really poor designers don't really spend much time understanding, and then they're just out there creating things. A lot of times I equate that more to art than to design, because art is kind of just a self-expression, right? You're creating things just, from yourself, and it doesn't really matter whether someone really loves it or not, unless you're a professional artist trying to make a living off it, then it matters. But for the most part, that's what differentiates design from art, is this upfront understanding piece. You're not creating something because you want to create something. You're creating something because you're trying to provide value or meet someone else's needs, right? You're creating something on behalf, really, of someone else. And that's why this understanding piece on the front end of design becomes really important. So human-centered design is an approach to innovation that bridges design and business and social science to focus on deeply understanding human needs to inform the creation of meaningful solutions. It's exactly what a needs-based innovation process should look like. So there's a lot of innovation processes out there, right? And I've just listed a few here. And I throw Six Sigma and Lean and what we kind of think of as quality methods. I don't really mince words between quality and innovation, because these things are all about doing something new that's going to create new value, right? And at that level, that's how I think about innovation. The difference between those methods and human-centered design, one of the biggest differences is the starting point. What do they start with, right? And usually when you're using the quality methods, such as Six Sigma, your starting point is a business process. You're going to analyze a business process to figure out how to basically design it to get greater efficiency or reliability, higher quality on the back end. Difference with the human-centered design process is that you don't start with what you have as a business today or as a process today. You just start with needs first, right? You start with people's needs. And oftentimes that's customer needs, that's where you start, but we use human-centered design at United Health Group internally as well around our employee needs. Designing more resources more effectively for them to be more effective at their jobs so they can be more effective delivering their services to customers. And even at Mayo Clinic, when we were doing our design work at Mayo Clinic, we probably spend at least 50%, if not more, of our design work focused on unmet needs of physicians and staff members. And thinking about how we create better services, tools, resources, and processes to enable them to be more effective at delivering services to patients. So it's not just about our end customers, we can also use it internally as well. It's kind of what I was saying earlier about where it starts. If I put the perfect innovation idea at the middle of this Venn diagram, desirability, feasibility, and viability. Desirability is what do people want? Feasibility is it technically and organizationally feasible for me to deliver this new idea? And viable, I have to be financially viable, to be able to sustain this idea. Human-centered design is really encouraging our approach to start at the top. Starting at, do we really understand what people need? And what's going to provide value to them first? And logically, that makes so much sense, because if you did the bottom really, really well, and I work with a lot of people who can do the bottom two amazingly well, so well that they're oftentimes comfortable just starting there, because that's what they're really good at. But if you do that really well and then you bring something to market and it doesn't meet the top one, what happens? You just wasted a whole lot of money, right? Because you can be really, really good at the bottom, but if people aren't going to want that thing when you put it out there, it's not going to deliver on those two things down at the bottom. So that's why design, and that's a lot of the value proposition we're bringing into our organization right now, is let's make sure that what we decide to do before we start to develop business cases and start to build and start to pilot things, let's make sure we're got a really good understanding of what are the unmet needs here and how can we best address them. We use a process that looks like this to go through our design. And it starts with defining up front, discovering, we synthesize information, we create and we build things. And then the communicate is usually about a transition, right? Because human-centered design isn't human-centered implementation. And there's a lot of things that happen to bring a lot of these things to life that go far beyond the human-centered design process. And so that oftentimes involves a handoff or a communication or a transition into the implementation and ownership. And what we're going to do over the next hour or so is start to drive into kind of each step of this process, so I can start to give you a feel of, well, what are the types of activities that really go on in each step of this process? What makes potentially challenging in each step of the process, and where are some really big value propositions that you get out of going through the steps in that process. If I take that same diagram and I kind of put it on a chart like this, it may look even a little more familiar to you. If you're familiar with innovations at all, you often find a common characteristic across innovation methods, which is this double diamond. And it doesn't really matter the process. Almost, a lot of those innovations methods I showed you earlier have a similar thing. And what the diamond is really signifying is this, the focus, right? And so in your observe stage or in your explore stage, you're really gathering information that's widening your perspective, your point of view. And then you go through this phase of bringing things together in the creation of opportunity spaces in the synthesizing phase. And then you go back wide again as you start to think about solutions and then come back together towards what you want to prototype. And it's a different process maybe than how our minds may work or how our minds have been trained to work. Is that usually we think of the funnel diagram, right? Where I'm just going to start wide and I'm just going to drive until I get narrower, rule out things, get more confident about things, validate things, disprove things. And so actually getting good at doing this process usually involves a change of perspective or a change of thinking. Another way to look at this is, and a couple of points I want to make of this is the same process, just a couple more details on the steps as you go through. And one of the points I like to make with this curve, and the reason why it's on a curve, because there's this interesting line in the middle between abstract and concrete, which also makes this process a bit foreign and a little different than what we're used to. Because I don't know about you guys, but I come from this background as well as most of us are really comfortable with analytical and concrete information. You're in the Masters of Healthcare Delivery Science program here. I'm assuming that's a pretty safe assumption. We like numbers, we like facts, we like figures. I have a master's in healthcare administration from the University of Minnesota. I'm an analytical guy down to the bone, but I've been able to get out of that a little bit over the past decade or so. But what that means is that we're really good along these things along the bottom, and the stuff on the top is more abstract, and it's not concrete, and it's ambiguous, and it oftentimes doesn't make sense. And so a really good innovation and design process involves being able to go up into that abstract at some points in the process and be comfortable with the ambiguity. Almost every good design product that I'd lead, and so now, I've led hundreds, right, of design projects, from things that last a couple of weeks to things that last months. Almost every good project somewhere right in the middle, maybe a little bit before you get to the middle, involves the situation where the team goes, what the hell are we doing? Like they're completely lost. Completely lost. And maybe you feel that way for other reasons on some other projects. But these guys intentionally do that, right? And it's not like, oh, we know we've been here before, we know we're going to find our way. There's a bit of that, but oftentimes they're really concerned because they lose themselves so much, in trying to get into this abstract world about interpreting things and why that matters. And there's so many questions and things that you start asking, right, to try to make sense of things. And literally they feel like they're lost. And that's when I also get a little worried and nervous too. But for the most part, if you're working with folks who are skilled in doing that, they can bring it back down and start to make things concrete out of it. When we think about design in organizations, we can talk about the process and the methods, but I think there's just some overall kind of mindsets that are critical, for everybody involved in doing really good design work. I think you've probably arrived now at this, at the put people first kind of knowledge, right? I'm driving needs-based innovation. It's about what people need. It's about their unmet needs. It's about their unarticulated needs. It's about understanding that at a deep level. And we're going to get into a little bit more detail around that. Making to think is a mindset that is, again, challenges probably what we're used to doing. Usually my version, or the version I see a lot about make to think is, I know how to make to think. It's called planning, right? That's usually, our kind of version of what make to think is. That's what we would refer to as doing planning. And I said in so many planning meetings where we're talking about what to do and we're thinking about what to do and we're discussing what to do and we're just debating options and alternatives and all this kind of stuff. And the alternative to that is just stop talking about it and go out and start building something, doing something, right? It's a very, very different approach. Very, very different approach. Collaborating often, we can all kind of, I think, relate to that and be comfortable with that. Practicing discovery, it's about learning and exploring and being curious. This is the one where I'd probably see our biggest gap, mostly in our future professionals. So when I was at Mayo Clinic, I was so excited about the work that we're doing there. I went back to the University of Minnesota and I said, I really believe that we have to start educating our future leaders about this field, this discipline, because I think it's so critical to the future of innovating and making our healthcare, system better. And so since that time, I've been teaching graduate level and executive level courses at the University of Minnesota and a couple other universities as well. I will tell you, and mostly graduate students, right? So these are folks in their early 20s. And the biggest concern I have about our future healthcare leaders is kind of this lack of curiosity, if you will. This kind of like willingness to ask questions and kind of challenge, how things exist. And part of it's they're right in the middle of getting flooded with, how the system works today and why it works the way it does. And this is why we have Masters of Healthcare Administration degrees, because it's so darn complex. We actually have to create a separate degree so we can actually teach people about the complexities of the healthcare industry. So their minds just get flooded that 2 years, and that's probably one of the most concerning things is we got to pull out of that to say, okay, you learned all that, now let's figure out, how to blow it up, because a lot of it has to change. How do you do that? And that's a skill set that oftentimes a lot of these young professionals aren't learning today. And to try to make that transition, to get that integrated into that curriculum is a huge, huge challenge. And then experimenting daily is related to the other two, making to think and practice discovery is, again, trying new things and learning by doing. It's just being willing to put ourselves out there and to try something new and to be able to be comfortable if it doesn't work. And being able to get the learnings out of that. I'm going to just stop for a second. This is a kind of a transition point between, where we've come so far is why we need design or why design is important and what it is. Okay? Remember, I wanted to talk about that a little bit up front so that we all have a pretty good understanding of kind of what the heck I'm talking about up here today. But how we think about design as a professional discipline that can be applied to the work that we're doing within our organizations to create new services that are going to deliver value. After this, where I go is we're going to dive into the process a little bit, and we're going to work through a couple exercises too, and this is going to be kind of the more tactical understanding of how it works and how it provides value. So before we go there, do you guys have any reactions or comments or questions to the stuff that we presented so far?
Actually do.
I don't know if I want to ask a question, sort of, but it really happened to me. We had a project that we have an innovations department. I'm in a big health system, really big, and 20,000 employees and all this 7 hospitals. And we had a project that we wanted to do, and my partner said, let's go to the innovations department. We have one. And the innovations department basically was established to sell some technology, some mobile apps and some other things so that that was their initial thing. People had ideas about different devices, and the surgeons wanted to market devices and, stuff like that. But they, So in this project that we had in mind, we talked to them about the methodology, and they said, well, they use a lean startup methodology for their innovation. Okay. And so when we heard this pitch, just a pitch like you just gave, which was fantastic, and we said, let's present it to the leaders to see if they will buy it. They basically didn't understand anything, didn't show up, bagged it right away. I mean, there was this really gap between their understanding of what could be achieved by that and what, versus lean process methodology. So now we have a VSA scheduled. So, maybe comment on, how you see that again, you know, how that happened, because we could not sell it. So I'm thinking maybe I need to go back and explain it differently, but
Yeah, yeah. I'd be curious actually if there's other people in the room who maybe have a comment or a build on that before I address it. Does anybody else have innovation departments within their organizations? A couple. A couple. We're debating. So, first off, that's awesome to see that a few do. And a question for the folks that don't is why not? And let me start there a little bit. You know, I feel like I've been talking about this for way too many years because I keep saying we're kind of at a point in innovation today where quality was at maybe 30 years ago. In that we know it's important, we know we need to do it as an organization. So you may not have an innovation department, but if I ask you, how many people work in organizations where innovation is being communicated as either a primary value or something we need to do more of? Almost everybody will raise their hand, right? Everybody will raise their hand. So imagine 30 years ago in quality, I can imagine that the same thing was happening. Is that, you know what, we need to be a quality organization. We need to do quality more. We need to build it into everything that we do. Get it on everybody's mind. And we didn't have quality departments back then. We didn't have professionals who only did quality because our belief was, well, that thing didn't even exist really. And our belief was, well, why would I need a quality professional when really it needs to be everybody's job? Everybody should be thinking about quality, right? Right? If we're going to be a quality organization, I need everybody. It should be everybody's job, not just one person's job. If it's just one person's job, then it's not going to happen over here, right? You've heard that argument before, right? But now we know, I mean, if I ask you, you know, who has a quality department today? Everybody has a quality department today. And it's because we recognize that there are specific skill sets and professional disciplines and processes and methods to do this work at a high level. And that's what we need to do. Same place today with innovation. Everybody's talking about it. We got to do it. But because we don't really have a good understanding of how we can make it more reliable, more repeatable, how we can, you know, actually employ people with specific skill sets, and what those skill sets are. That's another thing is I see a lot of innovation departments just like we just got really smart people in there who are really creative. And that, you know, those are the people who should be doing an innovation department. And a lot of that's just a kind of there's a lot of things going on there. But one of the innovation department doesn't need to be filled with designers, totally. But they're one of the few professional fields out there that have so many skill sets that are required for a reliable and repeatable innovation process. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more in a second. So that's oftentimes a warning signal to me is that you got your innovation department, maybe they're doing, you know, this, that, and the other, but we don't have really anybody skilled at, you know, prototyping or, you know, qualitative inquiry around unmet needs or, you know, that's what I like to start to get into really quickly. It's great they have a department. Now let's talk about the skills and the processes and the methods that you're bringing through into that department to make it work. So coming back around to your question about whether it worked or didn't work, that's a really complicated question and one that, you know, I get really jazzed up about, but it's one that, yeah, you know, listen, when I teach, right, I teach the graduate students and they ask me, it's like, I want to do what you do, Ryan. Where can I go or what organization, you know, is doing this or what should I look for to do this type of work? And that's a really hard question to answer for, you know, our future healthcare administrators. So the first thing you have to do is you just have to assess whether the leader of that organization wants to do it. They have the right mindset to do it. You know, because today, I don't know if it's a right or wrong decision. I mean, if you ask me, it's a right decision, but I totally understand, you know, like organizational mindsets and what you want to accomplish, right? A lot of small community hospitals are like, I just need to keep the lights on, right? I can't be thinking about all this other stuff, building design, doing innovation, all this kind of stuff. I think they could, but a lot of them are in the mindset, you know, just like, you know, and they're probably going to be fine for the next 10 or 20 years just doing that. And if I had a graduate student that wanted to go there, I'd be like, no, I mean, don't go to that organization because you're not going to be doing that. And you can spend your next 20 years trying to convince the leader of that organization that they should. and they won't, right? And so a lot of it's just does the leadership aspire to do these types of things or don't, and that's the first step you gotta challenge, because I've been in situations where nobody wants to spend their next 20 years trying to convince somebody to do something that they're just not going to be interested in doing. Oftentimes just a leadership directive. Yeah, Rob?
There's so many macro issues going on. For example, states struggling with Medicaid costs and ACO design issues. Can you connect for us, before we get into the human-centered part, which human are we designing for, and how does it connect to these macro issues?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think so many of these, a lot of the macro levels can be solved, or at least informed by a human-centered approach. And actually, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, is like, well, I'm not up here professing that human-centered design is the solution for every innovation problem or every problem that you have. That's not what I'm about to do. And so I'm going to talk to you in a little bit here about when it works for some things and when it doesn't for another. Because like even at United Healthcare, I'm telling a lot more people that this is not the approach you should be taking. You actually need to take another approach to solve your problem, or you'd be best suited to do that. So I think a lot of it is about that, is figuring out when it works, and when it can provide value to get to a better solution on that problem than not. And mostly within that is understanding the people in that system and how much of your solution is relying on whether, providing new value or providing a better system for those people is going to be a driver in that. There are so many problems in the healthcare industry that have absolutely nothing to do with that. Yeah, unfortunately, but most of those problems occupy a lot of our time, and so that's probably the biggest differentiator.
So when you were talking about what is design, I wrote down a quote here from you. Said understanding, between creating and understanding. The understanding piece is the one that differentiates design from art, and that stuck with me. And then your next slide, or in sequence there, you had the Venn diagram, and so I'm putting that understanding piece with the desirability piece.
Yeah, you got it.
Is that?
Yep.
Would that be correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just trying to kind of tie some things together.
Yep.
And so I wrote that down. I thought, well, those things are kind of hand in hand, same level type thing.
You got it.
So, and this wouldn't be a good conference if you didn't have some constructive feedback and engage the speaker. So I'm going to have to disagree with you because I run a community hospital, and we can't just keep doing the same things to keep the lights on for the next 20 years. We got to do this stuff. So.
You're not disagreeing with me. That's music to my ears.
Right. And
Yeah.
so that we're struggling, and we're an independent community hospital. We're not part of a system, and we want to stay independent. And in order to do that, I think these changes have to take place.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Thanks.
I think I'm still struggling a little bit with the definition of those three innovations. So market-based innovation, technology innovation, and then needs-based innovation.
Yeah.
Because I think about market-based innovation, that's somebody responding to a need, I believe. Technology innovation, same type of thing, responding to a need. So then I get to that last one. I don't quite understand what are we innovating? Are we innovating people's needs, or are we just better understanding people's needs, which leads to maybe the other two types of innovation?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. So the second part of your question there is going to be addressed when we go through the process, I think, which will give a better understanding of that. The first part, so I have to go back and refresh my memory around how Booz defined it, because what they did with those three types of innovations is they profiled companies across the world in terms of their balance, in terms of what types of companies were market-based, technology-based, and needs-based. If I recall correctly, the market-based, you're right, they are meeting needs, but those needs are oftentimes of other organizations or entities within the system. And when we refer to needs-based innovation, that type of needs-based innovation focused on end user and customer needs directly. So it's just kind of a matter of degree, I think, is how they defined it in the article. So like, you know, you can argue in that nasty diagram I put up with all the little circles around the healthcare system, well, all of those organizations in there are addressing other organizations' needs, right? But are those needs reflected by patients, you know, or how many degrees away from patients are you? And the interesting thing, thanks for bringing that up again, I didn't mention one other point, is when Booz did that profile, and then they looked at the performance of the organizations based on the spectrum of where they were. So if you're heavily market-based or needs-based or technology-based, they showed the same thing that the DMI article did, that the ones who focus more heavily on needs-based innovation outperform the other companies who may heavily rely on market or technology-based innovation.
So,
Pardon?
It kind of goes to the performance of our entire industry.
Right.
Right where you started.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks. Perfect.
So I just had a quick question to tie or to pick up on a couple of comments here. When you go into one of these human-centered design efforts, it seems like it'd be tricky to figure out how do you make sure that the humans that you're working with and that you're saying what are the needs are in the proper context, right? Mm-hmm. So some people think, you know, I really just want to have an easier day at my job here, and other people, and then there's sort of the macro economic context, and how do you make sure that the needs that are defined by the people that you're working with sort of are targeted correctly, that you put the right boundaries around it?
Yeah, yeah.
Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And a lot of that gets kind of teased out as you start to document and explore what all those different types of needs are. And you start to pick and choose and synthesize. And we'll go through the process here in a little bit in terms of how do you start to synthesize and make sense of all of that and then make decisions about, okay, well, what needs do I want to pay attention to here? You know, because that ends up being then, you know, you design a solution based on I just want to make my day easier, or do you design a solution based on... Right, right. Well, yeah, I mean, because that could be one of the values or one of the needs that are focused in there. So we'll hit on it a little more, but if you still have questions after the next section, we can come back to it. Good. Maybe one more question here, and then we'll go to the next step.
When you describe understanding, it is almost an anthropological exercise.
Perfect.
As a bird watcher, I was told never put a chick back into the nest because they have to figure it out. How do you almost pull yourself back in a Zen-like manner and say, I'm just going to watch this, without tipping off your ability to influence change later, or warning somebody that this is what you're here to do? How do you balance that tension?
Yeah, can I put a hold on that question as we start to go in? Because I'm going to do a little bit about design research and then actually engage you guys around doing some design research, but I'll hit on a number of the things that you referred to. Is that fair? Okay, hold me to it, by the way. So I mentioned earlier again, okay, so the first thing I want to make clear is that I totally understand that human-centered design is not the answer to all our problems, okay? I am not saying that, and I totally do not believe that it is. But I do believe, and I'm really passionate, that it provides a huge amount of value in the right situations, and that given the evidence I shared with you earlier, that we are in a huge kind of need to bring these types of methods and can get a lot of value out of them in the industry. So first off is figuring out, okay, well, when does it make sense? And what should I be using it for within my company? And, you know, as Yaz mentioned, I've been, you know, the organization has really started to identify and understand, our organization, United Healthcare, is understanding the value of this. And so with very limited resources, I'm being asked a lot to, like, we want to get some human-centered design perspective on this, and this, and this. And so I'm in a position now of having to help people understand, well, is that really the best approach, or are there other things, you know, that would be a better fit? And this is how I do that, or these are the things I'm thinking about in my mind as I think about, is this really, you know, where you want to bring human-centered design in, or is it really kind of a problem that's best served through other means? So first is, you can't have a solution in mind. This is the first, like, you know, the first reason why we wouldn't do a human-centered design project. If someone said, I got this great idea, we're going to do this and this and this, can you help me, you know, design it from a human-centered perspective so that it's successful? You know, and we do get asked that a lot. And oftentimes, maybe there's an opportunity to do that, but you probably already made so many decisions about the design of the solution that, you know, it becomes like the lipstick on the pig kind of problem. I can only do so much because you went this far, and I'm really not interested in just kind of blushing it up a little bit. If you had the opportunity to go back and start to rethink, you know, all the decisions that you made that you got this far, that's really when human-centered design is going to provide the most value. It's pretty obvious that the human element has to be there as well. You know, is the value that we create for the people in the system important to the overall success of this effort? And we have to have a team approach, and you have to have the ability of not only the design team to go deep, but also the people, you know, we're always working with other people in the business as well. And the more that we can get their time and attention towards going through the process with us, the better results we're going to get. So with our Innovation Council over the past 4 years, we've commissioned and catalyzed a number of projects, some of which have used human-centered design, some of which have not. And we recently did kind of a debrief analysis on which ones turned out to be successful and which didn't. And there are a number of criteria and factors that influence whether a project was successful or not successful or not. But the most successful projects had a direct correlation to whether we had a dedicated team that was able to spend time to go deep around doing the work. I mean, it just stood out like a sore thumb. The projects who were using like 5% of this person's time and 10% of this person's time, and they got together a couple times a week. Some of them worked, but over time, most of those products can't perform nearly at the level of whether I got a team, I got dedicated folks to it, and we're going deep. And oftentimes the funny thing is that doesn't mean it required more resources. This is you're able to free up some time to get people to focus for a shorter period of time. You get it done faster, and you get it done with a higher level of quality. That's hard to do. I mean, because if you guys know, you're juggling 15 different things at one time, and almost everybody you work with probably is too. So that's a really key part of doing this work really well is, can I create the structures where I can get a team to be able to focus their time and attention? Because a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve, we're trying to create new things, and they're hard problems. They're hard problems, and we're all really smart people, but if we can get a little more time and attention and be able to focus on things, we're able to go to that next level. You're going to get to a better place because of it. All of that at the front end informs making sure that you ask the right question to start the design project. So we frame it up with design challenges up front, and you got to frame that challenge in the right lens, and that influences kind of the whole direction of the project. Now, you can tailor the design project as you start to go through your flair and focus, but that sets the whole kind of theme for the project. And so this is kind of linked to earlier about whether you have a solution in mind. So let me give you a quick example of a project that came to us a couple of years ago now, and it's an internal focus project. And it was actually for a community and state business. And our community and state business was really growing rapidly. They were going to bring on a bunch of new employees. And because of that, they said, we need to make sure that we design the right first 4 weeks so that we can get these folks as productive as quickly as possible. Makes a lot of sense, right? It's like we need to make sure that we have the right tools, the right support, the right resources, the right education. They can find the right things so that they can quickly get up to speed and start providing value for our organization. They said, can you help us design an online employee journey map that's clickable and allows people to get to the right resources? Right? So now you guys already kind of know, I already previewed this. It's like, that's a pretty specific solution, right, to that problem that they had in mind, but that's how they approached us. And honestly, I'd say about 80% of the people who want to work with us come to us with a solution like that in mind. But that gives us the opportunity to engage them in a conversation. To say, well, what if we backed it up? We said, well, are you really sure that a journey map is the right tool? Okay, let's just assume that an online resource is the right tool. Well, why don't we start there? Why don't we say, how can we design a better online resource, that'll help these guys more effectively find information? I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, okay, we're willing to, step back that far. I said, well, okay, take it back one more level. What if we said, how can I design resources for new employees that enable to get more productive, whether they're online or offline or it's an orientation program or whatever it might be, right? Because that's probably where you'd want to start if you could, right? It's like, understand everything that these guys need to do and design whatever resources it's going to take to get these guys productive. And so we didn't quite have the ability to push them quite back that far, but we arrived somewhere in the middle. which was, okay, we want to get an online resource for a number of reasons because we've got a lot of people in a lot of different places, all this kind of stuff. But let's create a resource for them on there. So do you see the kind of logic there about you can frame it pretty narrowly, you can frame it really broad? And the answer isn't that I always want to frame it super broad. You don't need to do that oftentimes, because when you frame it super broad, I mean, your ability to get to something really specific, it takes a little bit longer time, you got to explore more things, it takes more resources, all that kind of stuff. So where's the happy medium, right? And oftentimes it's a judgment call in many ways, but it's based on, how much time do I have, how high quality of a solution do I need to get to in that period of time, how many resources do I have to do this, all that kind of stuff. But you shoot yourself in the foot if you go too far down the process, because I need an online journey map, to help people navigate. You're making a lot of assumptions that that's going to be the biggest value proposition there. So if you start there, your ability to probably create new value is really, really limited. Whatever question we get, the first thing we do is we write it down on a board, and we start to talk about every single word in the design challenge. And I think this is such an amazing activity to help people not only, one, get on the same page, but help understand, okay, what is this project really, really about? So this was a project about how might we reduce childhood obesity, and you can see this is kind of you can see how that process works, where people, and sometimes we'll write this on huge whiteboards. This is a huge whiteboard in the middle of the room. People are like going up and they're circling things, they're writing things, and we're all having conversations about, okay, well, what does this mean? Should we reinterpret this? Is there an opportunity to explore this? What types of questions do we have? So on and so forth. And sometimes we take that and we boil it into much more nicer looking, versions of that. But it's the same, activity here, where you're literally talking about what the meaning is of every single word in that design challenge. There's a lot of value in doing that, particularly at the outset of a project, not only for your product team, but also then to be able to communicate back to, the other people that you're working with that this is how we're really thinking about this opportunity. Kind of sets the scope. It sets the direction a little bit, maybe even starts to change some, perceptions right at the outset of what this product is about. Okay, let me stop there before we go into, okay, well, now that I've framed up the project, now that I have I picked the right project, I framed up the product, now what do I do, to really start getting going on things? We're going to talk about design research. Before I do that, anybody have a question? Okay, let's keep going. So we're at the explore phase now. Okay, so we've defined the project, we've set it up, we've picked what type of project it is where human-centered design is going to provide value. Now, we're really going to start to do the work. And this first step is about exploring, and this is linked to the other words I've used earlier. What's desirable to people? What do people need? How do I understand what they need? And the catch here is that really good innovation opportunities are not things that people are going to be able to tell you about, right? And this is, I think, starting to become a little more common knowledge. Is that the good innovation opportunities are a little further underneath what people are going to say to you, or the explicit information that they're going to provide. And so these techniques about exploring are oftentimes trying to get at what are people not telling us? That might be really interesting needs or opportunities for us to create new value for them. And a lot of that starts from a foundation of empathy. So when we do design research at the front end, we're doing a lot of things, right? We're gathering all the secondary research and the market research studies and focus group information and all of that. We don't want to ignore that. That's a framework, right? But where design research provides a unique value add in that research process is more this social science, ethnographic, anthropologic kind of view on people's lives. And it's really about establishing empathy. You guys have obviously heard and probably can relate to the value of walk a mile in your customer's shoes. As much as we know how important that can be to doing the right thing and creating better services, how often does it happen? And how does it happen? That's what this is attempting to answer. So how do we really walk that mile in our customer's shoes so that we can design new solutions from that perspective? So we have design researchers with backgrounds in cultural anthropology and social sciences who are really good at doing this type of work. This type of work involves really being able to wipe out everything that you kind of believe in, you value, and being able to just spend time seeing the world through another person's point of view. I have a video that you may have seen before, but yeah, I'm going to play it anyway, because every time I watch it, it moves me as well. And again, you might have seen this before, but it's probably the best healthcare video I've seen that really helps you understand, you know, how you should feel when you're being really empathetic with the people that we're serving in our healthcare organizations. Okay? With that intro, I wonder if anybody knows what it is. We'll see. It's always hard to recover from that one. But imagine how you're feeling right now, probably. And imagine bringing that type of emotion into your conversations at work, you know, and your decision making about what we're going to do as an organization. Because that's the kind of empathy, you know, that our design team is bringing into every conversation now, you know, about what we're going to be doing or how the decisions are made. And you can imagine if people come in there with the emotions that you're probably feeling right now into those types of, how the decisions are probably going to be a little different, or how at least the conversations are going to be a little different. That's what, I mean, those are the people that we're creating the services for, right? And it's so easy to get so many, you know, a few steps removed from that, right? But you shouldn't. You shouldn't. I mean, sometimes we have to because I can't go into a meeting every day and cry, which I kind of feel like doing right now. But you can still bring that empathy into these meetings. We have to. We work in the healthcare industry. Almost all of you got into the healthcare industry to help situations like that, right? So we can't leave those emotions and that empathy on the table, you know, all the time. Right? And honestly, we need to fire that back up again. We need to bring some of that more to the table. So how do we do that? We don't start every morning with the video, although that would be pretty interesting. You know, it was like, let's watch this video this morning and then, you know, go about our day. So we empathize by listening to people and watching their behaviors and experience in the day in life. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're doing to actually achieve that level of empathy. And that's going to lead us to the better identification of needs and the better decision-making about what needs are going to be important to pay attention to, and that creates opportunities. And then finally, that's when we start to create the solutions. Okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to decide to do or build or create or design to meet those needs? And so we'll go in the field. We spend a lot of time in the field and to achieve that level of empathy. And like I said, we have a lot of skilled professionals who are, and I'll tell you the difference between the skilled professionals and the non-skilled in a bit. We use skilled professionals, but we also use those skilled professionals to bring everybody else, you know, onto the field. And, you know, Yaz continues to talk today about an experience we had a couple of years ago where I took an entire group of people and spent an entire morning or entire afternoon in New York City in the homes of people who are living at poverty level wages. I mean, you think about it, like everybody that I work with doesn't live in those situations, probably doesn't have any family members or friends living in that situation. So we all went out and we spent a half day listening to and talking to and experiencing what it's like to live a life, you know, in that situation. And we still refer back to some of the things we heard and we learned, you know, just in that half day, you know, 2 years ago about people who are living in that type of situation. And it's informed how we think about that and how we approach that problem. But it's not just about going out and, you know, being there. There's definitely skills involved in how you can go out and get the most out of being there and getting the most out of that. So our researchers create learning guides, and you know, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but learning guides can be structured really, really thoughtfully. Usually we're going out to spend 3 or 4 hours. We're usually in people's houses because that's where people oftentimes are thinking about or dealing with their health care the most. And we'll get to know them. And we'll spend a lot of time talking through not a lot of questions. The questions are really prompts. What we're trying to get at are not answers, but rather stories. We just want to understand these people, right? I'm not going to understand these people if I'm just peppering them with questions and they're just feeding me back answers. I want them to, you know, tell me about their lives, tell me about what's important to them, what do they value, you know, how does their world work? And, you know, sometimes they're telling stories about things that have absolutely nothing to do with healthcare, and that's okay because it helps me understand who they are and what they're about and how they view the world. When we go out into the field, you know, there's a bunch of types of tips on how to do this really well. And it's taken me, you know, I'm actually a terrible kind of design researcher, you know, and mostly because I have to compare myself to the folks who are really good at doing this. And so it makes me understand like what I'm not very good at and how I can also be better at those things. But you have to be an amazing listener first, in that you have to be able to open your mind and be able to explore and kind of hear everything through their perspective. We go out and we spend, like I said, you know, 3 or 4 hours with someone. And when you spend 3 or 4 hours with someone in their house, listening to them tell you about their lives, I tell people I come away with that with a better understanding of these people than I have of most all of my family members. Just think about that. You probably never sat down and just listened to one of your family members tell you about them and their lives for 4 hours straight. It's hard to do. It's really, really hard to do. But after doing it, like I said, I guarantee you, I know every one of these people that we talk to at a deeper level than any family member or any friend that I've known for a long time. There's very few people in the world that I know as much as I know about these people when we're done doing this type of research. Oops, I don't want to go there. We didn't talk to them. So what I want to do over lunch is to have you guys do an exercise or an activity where you actually practice some of this, like trying to get to know somebody and seeing the world through another person's point of view. Because that type of work is really so powerful. And like I mentioned, it's this beautiful, beautiful add to mostly the quantitative information we usually use to make decisions about what's important to people. Right? I get the market survey research, I get the focus group research, I get the trends reports, and all that gives me some insights, about what people value and what they don't. But when I can go and I can supplement it with this rich and deep insight about just like people, because the world doesn't look like, like the brand messages we see on the nice commercials and those types of things. When we go and we talk to people, I mean, that's like real world. That's like real life stuff, And oftentimes that gives you some amazing complementary insights to that focus group stuff. And sometimes it gives you a nugget, just a huge nugget of inspiration, as well. It's kind of like watching that empathy video. I mean, you know how your mind would be changed if you watched that empathy video before every administrative meeting that you went into. Well, sometimes we go and we get these stories, and then we propel them through the entire project. And again, we're savvy enough to know that we can't just design for one specific project, but rather that one specific insight or that one specific story. But sometimes those stories can just be a catalyst. And I just want to share maybe one more story with you before we get into our lunch activity. Is one of those stories that I continually refer back to this day is. I was doing some research around cancer care and cancer care services. And as part of that, we were spending time in a house a studio apartment in Chicago with a late 20-something-year-old woman who had been diagnosed, I think about a month or maybe a few months previously with a rare type of brain cancer. Prognosis was terrible, and so we went and visited her because we just wanted to spend time with her and again empathize with her and understand what the world looks like from her perspective. We learned a lot of stuff that day sitting in that studio apartment in Chicago with her and her mother, and I heard a lot of things that day, but the most striking thing was what I saw. Studio apartment, really small, it was nicely kept, not a lot of room. And she was getting her cancer care in Chicago, so her mother was from out of state, and her mother came to live with her in that studio apartment during the periods where she was getting cancer care. And the most striking thing that I continue to think back to this day is that I still have this image that's like seared in my mind of the oven door was a counter height oven door. And because there wasn't a desk anywhere, Mom had opened the oven door and pulled up a chair to the oven door because she needed a place to stack all the bills and the paperwork, and the explanation of the benefits and everything, that, her daughter was receiving because she was, getting so intensive cancer care. And I looked at that situation, I look at Mom being there in a studio apartment in Chicago, and I'm thinking, that's like the last thing you want to be using that oven for. It's just like a signal, right, of like, what's really messed up right here, I'd like to see some chocolate chip cookies coming out of that oven, and I'm sure Mom would too, and I'm sure she would too. But yet Mom was spending a lot of her time, and energy taking care of, the things we require from a system perspective. And now, working with a large insurance company, of course, that one has continued to be at the back of my head. At the time, I was working in care delivery too, and so we were thinking about how that influences the actual care delivery experience as well. But so you can go out and you can see these things, and really if you're there and you're really experiencing it from another person's point of view, they become stories and insights that just kind of drive your motivation, about like, wow, I never want to see anybody in that situation. I'm going to, do whatever I can to kind of make that better, make that a better experience. Okay, so yes, this is my picture for lunch, which is what we're going to be doing next. But you guys remember that episode, don't you? Yeah, I've even seen that episode. But what I want you to do over lunch is this. It's going to be a working lunch. So the buffet is outside out here, and we're grabbing lunch, come back in. And we're going to do some design research, okay? And so I give you a design challenge, a really broad design challenge, which is really exciting. Create a new wellness resource for a woman named Maggie, and you're going to get to know Maggie. And this new wellness resource could be a new service or a new product. We're not actually going to go all the way to creating something for her, but I want you to know what you should be looking for, paying attention to the right mindset, all right? So we're all in the healthcare industry. We want to create a better health or wellness resource for Maggie. So what you're going to do is you're going to work in pairs at your table, and you're individually going to review photos that I've put together of Maggie. They're in this envelope here. So and when you get back from lunch, you can open up this envelope and just start shuffling photos around the table. And all these photos are pictures of Maggie and her life. And out of that, you have to start interpreting, what matters to Maggie. What are her values, her beliefs, her behaviors. And then I want you to share your story. First you do that individually, and then I want you to share a story over lunch with your partner about who Maggie is, okay? And the challenge in doing that is you can't judge, you can't evaluate, you can't hypothesize. You really just have to see Maggie's world through her eyes and use those pictures to then tell a story about who Maggie is to your partner in as many specific terms as you can get. Does that make sense? So we're going to, just a heads up, because it's kind of a working lunch, we're going to go and grab lunch, we're going to do this exercise, and it's probably going to be about 12:15 or 12:20. We'll jump back in and go to the next step in the process. Does that make sense? Good? Okay. Thanks, everybody.